It was the summer of 1995. In Nintendo's headquarters in Kyoto, an engineer named Gunpei Yokoi was preparing to watch his career end in slow motion. The device he had built was sitting on a table in front of him. Red LEDs. A binocular visor mounted on a plastic stand, a controller that dangled below it like an afterthought. It weighed nearly 2 pounds. It could not be held up to your face for more than 15 minutes without causing headaches. It had no color, no portability in any meaningful sense. The battery life was approximately 6 hours if you were lucky, and the batteries were new. Nintendo was going to call it the Virtual Boy. They were going to sell it for $179. They were going to ship it in July 1995, between the launch of the Sega Saturn and the launch of the PlayStation. At the exact moment, the console market was undergoing the most dramatic generational shift in its history. Yokoi knew it wasn't ready. His engineers knew it wasn't ready. The developers who had been given early units knew it wasn't ready. Hiroshi Yamauchi, Nintendo's president, had already decided it was shipping. This is the story of how the man who invented the Game Boy was handed a product he didn't believe in, forced to ship it on a timeline he hadn't chosen, and then handed the blame when it failed. Exactly as everyone involved had privately predicted it would. To understand what happened to the Virtual Boy, you first need to understand who Gunpei Yokoi actually was, because Nintendo in 1995 was not a company of equals, and Yokoi was not an ordinary employee. He had joined Nintendo in 1965 as a maintenance engineer on the factory floor. He was 22 years old. His job was to fix the machinery that produced Nintendo's Hanafuda playing cards. Hiroshi Yamauchi found him tinkering with a mechanical arm toy he had built to amuse himself between repairs, and instead of reprimanding him, gave him a budget and told him to make products. What followed was 30 years of ideas that defined portable gaming. The Game & Watch, the first handheld LCD game device, which established the D-pad that every controller since has copied. The Game Boy, a device so technically conservative that engineers at Sega and Atari openly mocked its specs at launch, and so perfectly designed for its actual use case that it outsold every technically superior competitor for a decade. Yokoi's philosophy had a name: lateral thinking with withered technology. Use cheap, proven components in unexpected ways rather than chasing the bleeding edge. Build for the constraint, not against it. The origin of the Virtual Boy was a company called Reflection Technology, which had developed a display system using a single row of red LEDs that vibrated at high speed to create the illusion of a full image. It was genuinely novel. It was also red-only, prone to causing eye strain, impossible to view in sunlight, and required the user to remain completely stationary while using it. Yokoi licensed the technology and began developing a portable virtual reality headset. The original vision was a device you could hold up to your face like binoculars, genuinely portable, genuinely immersive. The engineering reality was that the display required too much power, generated too much heat, and was too heavy to hold unsupported for any meaningful duration. The portable headset became a visor on a stand. The stand sat on a table. The user hunched over the table and pressed their face into the visor and stayed completely still. This was not virtual reality. This was an arcade cabinet you assembled on a table and then bent over to use. By 1994, Yokoi's team knew the product had fundamental problems that could not be engineered away within the constraints they had been given. The red-only display was not a temporary limitation. It was a consequence of the LED technology that the entire device was built around. Color would require a complete redesign. The eye strain was not a calibration issue. It was a consequence of asking human eyes to focus on a display that existed at a fixed focal length while the rest of the visual field was blocked. The portability was gone and was not coming back. Yokoi went to Yamauchi and told him the device needed more time. The accounts of that conversation that have emerged in the years since are consistent in their outcome, if not their detail. Yamauchi told him it was shipping. The reasoning, as best as it has been reconstructed, was competitive pressure. Sega and Sony were about to launch 32-bit hardware. Nintendo's own next-generation console, the Ultra 64, was not ready. The Virtual Boy was ready enough. and Nintendo needed something in the market. The development team was given a final timeline. Yokoi, understanding that the device was going to ship regardless of his objections, made the decision to focus the remaining development time on what could be fixed rather than what couldn't. The controller was refined. The software library was expanded. A handful of genuinely interesting games were developed that used the 3D depth effect in ways that were, within the severe constraints of the hardware, occasionally impressive. None of it addressed the eye strain. None of it added color. None of it made the device portable. None of it changed the fundamental reality that the Virtual Boy required you to sit completely still in a dark room and press your face into a plastic visor to experience something that gave many users headaches within minutes. The American launch was July 21st, 1995. The price was $179.95. The launch lineup included Mario's Tennis, Red Alarm, Teleroboxer, and Golf. The reviews were, to use the precise clinical term, brutal. GamePro gave it 2 out of 5. Electronic Gaming Monthly called it a solution looking for a problem. The Los Angeles Times ran a piece about the eye strain concerns that Nintendo's own packaging partially validated. The instruction manual included a warning recommending breaks every 15 to 30 minutes and advising against use by children under 7. Nintendo had shipped a product whose own instruction manual contained a health warning. Sales in the first month were soft. Sales in the second month were worse. By October, retailers were requesting return authorizations. Nintendo had projected selling 1.5 million units in North America in the first year. They sold approximately 770,000 across the device's entire lifespan. By the time Nintendo formally discontinued the Virtual Boy in December 1995, 5 months after launch, they had already stopped shipping units to North America in any meaningful volume. The price dropped to $99 almost immediately, then to $49.99 at clearance. There are accounts of units selling for $19.99 at KB Toys before Christmas 1995, marked down from $179.95 in a period of approximately 4 months. The markdown trajectory was so steep that it became a retail industry case study in how quickly consumer confidence could collapse on a single product. He was not fired? Nintendo was too careful for that, and Yokoi had 30 years of institutional history that made a direct termination complicated. What happened instead was quieter and, in some ways, worse. He was moved, reassigned. The Game Boy team, which he had built and which continued to print money for Nintendo through the mid-90s, was handed to other managers. Yokoi was given a reduced role that the company described with vague language about new projects and future development. In 1996, he resigned. He was 56 years old. He founded a small company called Koto and began developing a handheld console called the WonderSwan for Bandai. The WonderSwan launched in Japan in 1999 and was, by every account, exactly what you would expect from Gunpei Yokoi working without the constraints that had produced the Virtual Boy. Simple, elegant, built around proven technology used in unexpected ways. It sold 3.5 million units in Japan before being discontinued. He never saw it launch. On October 4th, 1997, Yokoi was a passenger in a car on a highway in Tottori Prefecture. The car was involved in a minor collision. Yokoi got out to assess the damage. He was struck by a passing vehicle and killed. He was 56 years old. The Game Boy went on to sell 118 million units across its lifespan. The Game Boy Advance, the DS, the 3DS, every Nintendo handheld that followed was built on the architecture of ideas Yokoi had established. The D-pad he designed for the Game & Watch is on every controller made by every manufacturer on the planet today. The Virtual Boy sold 770,000 units and is remembered as one of the worst product launches in gaming history. Here is what the obituaries and the retrospectives have consistently failed to say clearly. Gunpei Yokoi did not believe in the Virtual Boy. The engineers who built it did not believe in it. The developers who made games for it did not believe in it. Every person with direct technical knowledge of the device knew it had fundamental problems that the shipping timeline would not allow them to fix. Gunpei Yokoi never got to see any of that. He got out of a car on a highway in 1997, and that was the end of it. The worst product in Nintendo's history was not his fault. History has been slow to say so clearly.